You're listening to Dumpster Diving with
Janice.
and Jane. What the
Hey,
Hi, what the heck are we talking about today? And how
you're
are
blonde. Let's talk about that first. You appear blonde.
Well, it's kind of blonde. Yeah, it's blonde right now. It's funny. It was like a gray. It was a nice silver, light
Oh,
silver, and then I have burgundy underneath. I got rid of the teal.
oh,
Out with the teal, in with the burgundy. And it looks really cool. I get lots of compliments on it. The ends are purple because not all the teal came out. So
I
nice fun
see.
like ombre burgundy to purple. But
I don't even
because
know if you can call that ombre. I think it's just
it's
multicolored.
weird. Yeah, it's weird. It's
Yeah.
like rainbow hair, but not really. Not all the colors. But no, the blonde part was the gray, and it was nice and silver, but
Oh, and then
it so I have to use the purple shampoo and all that fun stuff. But then the
yeah,
red
yeah.
runs. And so it turned my hair like
Oh,
this peachy kind of color. And it actually is really cool when it's down and
oh, I bet.
and not a mess. It's really cool looking. And then when I flat iron it looks really cool. So yeah, so I changed it. It's no longer like the tips are just colored. It's now the first front of my hair is all
Nice.
like the blonde gray and then the back is the color.
Look
So
at
it's like,
you.
yeah, I'm
Look
having
at
fun with that.
you. I have my typical, although today everybody gets the washed it and let it air dry look.
Yeah, it
And
looks good. Looks like you just came off the beach.
so it's my beach curls. I worked 27 days to get them because they're not natural. So yeah. It's funny because you mentioned the purple shampoo and I know everybody wants to hear about this. I have that because my hair is colored and it's a little bit
Uh,
lighter. But I don't know, like lately I've had to mix in a different brand too because my hair feels so coarse. It's almost like I can't even wash it. Like it doesn't lather enough that I can wash it.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
it's not just me. All right, good. Because I
No,
was like, why, how? I'm like, why the fuck am I? Why? Am I doing it wrong? Like, am I supposed to do something different? How? It's very
no, you
complex.
do. It's like
With
it's
my
just
hair.
weird and
Yeah,
weird. So,
the
but it's
texture of
meant
it.
to strip out all the gold tones out of your
Yeah,
hair. So yeah, it
yeah.
makes it a little bit drier. So you just need to add like a little bit of other shampoo if you want to get that
Yeah.
lather.
I'm gonna mix it because what I did was just kind of switched back and forth. Now I'm just gonna mix it. I like that idea. The conditioner's fine. The purple conditioner's fine,
Yeah,
but yeah. So there you go. Hey everybody, aren't you glad you were here for that part of the conversation? It's so great. It's so great.
well,
We're so happy. We're
yeah,
so happy everybody's here. We had a slow April. We were just slammed, and our
that's
team
true.
that supports the podcast of 0 people did not step up. And so we are posting tomorrow, like the mini episode we did last week.
Which was
Uh,
fun.
it was
Let's
so fun.
look at that
It
real
was
quick.
so
That was
fun. Yeah.
fun. The between the dumpsters or behind the dumpsters, we haven't decided on the name yet.
Yeah.
Kind of like behind the dumpsters, but that was fun because it gave us like that little peek into or gave our five
Everyone
listeners
else.
the peek into um what the fuck we do. Yeah,
That's
how our
right.
brains are wired and
It's
together.
out, it's actually out there now. If you haven't listened to it, you're gonna want to go listen and just understand that there's no science behind this, that there's very little organization. But thank God we're both really creative and we have a lot to say. And so we just come together and go, oh wait, we're gonna talk about this, and this. Yeah, there's no magic, right? There's no magic.
We're really good at improv too. So
And we haven't used AI yet to just say, AI, here's who we are. We're amazing. Give us 30 episodes that we should cover for the
we're too complex for AI. AI would just
That's true.
not get us and they'd be
That's
like
right. That's
it
right.
would downplay our glory.
So what
So
I just heard you say is that everybody who uses AI really thoroughly are very simple people. That's what I
I
heard. You
didn't
just
say that
literally
way.
insulted
I'm just saying
everybody.
you and I are too complex for AI together.
Oh, the combination. Okay, all right. That's less insulting
Stop
to our
making me an
audience.
asshole.
You
God,
sounded like an
every
asshole. I
time.
just
Well,
pointed it out. I pointed it out.
sometimes you should just
You know
listen.
what? You know what? This is an episode of communication. So moving on. All right.
So stop
Okay.
talking.
Exactly. So, but it is an
Silence for the
episode
rest of the
on
episode. Silence.
if you were just like, you know what? We're not talking. How about that?
Yeah, we're
Um,
in a fight. Everyone gets the silent treatment, bitches. I'm just
That's
gonna sit
right.
here and
That's
stare at
right.
you.
And you better not push pause on this recording. You sit there in silence.
You look at
Speaking
me
of
with
speaking of
rolling your
harsh
eyes.
speaking of harsh bitchy women, today's episode is on stepmoms.
Oh, Melody, dearest. Oh, it
And
is
we
on
can say
stepmom.
that because we've both been them, but in all seriousness, today's conversation is going to be about our experiences in the role of stepmom. And hopefully, through our experiences, for those of you who are in that space, who are perhaps in the process of getting into that space, it comes to you later in terms of like blending a family. So, we're going to kind of talk about like what we have found that has helped us be effective in that role, pitfalls to avoid, all those kinds of things. And it's a topic that's really near and dear to both of us because, like I said, we've lived it, we've had step parents ourselves, right? We've kind of been on all ends of it. Yeah,
Yes. Oh
yeah,
my God, yes.
love that.
You
I
had,
know.
well, have I had multiple step parents? I mean, I guess I have. I had my stepdad, but you know, our father, the greatest father of all,
Yeah,
he, I mean, gave us multiple step parents, but we never really met them or
that's
anything.
true, but we don't know.
Yeah.
Shout out to all the stepmoms out there. I don't know. This isn't about you.
Woo!
This isn't about you.
Hey,
And
Bobby,
by
I
the way,
heard you're awesome. Like
oh,
you
exactly.
look
We've heard
super
that.
cool on Facebook.
Yeah,
Like
who
she's,
does?
she's like one of those grandparents. I'm just gonna go on a little
Go
tangent.
ahead.
I'm just
Go
gonna
ahead.
give Bobby a shout out.
Yeah.
So I've never met Bobby in my whole entire life,
Yep.
but I've heard lots about her through my siblings.
Yep.
And I see her on Facebook, and she's just the cutest thing.
She is.
She has like this little farm, and she gets the grandbabies out there, and they get to roll
Yep.
around in the dirt and jump around with goats and eat stuff out of the ground. And I just think it's the fucking cutest thing ever.
It
And I
is.
wish, or I hope that when I do become a grandma, even if I don't, that I'm
Yeah.
that lady. Like
That
I
you're
just
her.
want to have like a
Yep.
little piece of property and have my little fucking animals and fuck everybody else. That's
I
what
love
the
that.
vibe I get from her, and which I
Wow.
love.
Wow.
I don't know. She's super nice. I doubt she says fuck everybody, but she's living her
I
best.
feel like she does it, but who knows, right? Our Facebook personas aren't always really who we are, so she could be that chick behind the scenes. But I started this conversation by saying, speaking of all the obnoxious bitches out there, in jest, of course, because one of the things, as we were talking about planning for this episode, one of the things we noted is like, and we all know this, right? Stepmoms get a bad rap when you think about, when you think about the world of movies and that kind of stuff. I went on the rant about like every stepmom in every Disney movie. Jane
Oh
went
my
to the
God.
dark side of what were some of the movies you listed?
Like Cinderella
No,
and
no, no, the other you the horror movies. Like Mommy
oh, oh,
Dearest,
oh, Mommy
whatever.
Dearest, Flowers in the Attic, Children of the Corn. I
Right.
mean, Throw Mama from the Train. Remember that bitch? Like
I don't
Jesus
even know if I saw
Christ.
that one.
Oh, Goonies. The mom
Oh
on
yeah,
Goonies was horrible.
that's true.
I
That's
mean,
true.
she was just nasty,
So
nasty.
we get a bad rap. So part of the episode today is really about like dispelling that, right, on some level, and reminding all of us that there's no such thing as a unilateral, right, persona in any of these roles. But then also, and again, in all seriousness, to really get into some of our own lessons learned, to the extent that they can be helpful to other folks. Because I do know that, for me, moving into the role of a step parent was intense and challenging and
Yeah,
all the things. And I was so grateful to have under my belt my experience as a teacher and a school principal, et cetera, because I had to be a quasi parent in a lot of roles for different kids for different reasons over the years. And obviously understand kids at a deeper level, maybe, right? Because I've had so much experience with so many kids. But I can't imagine without that, right? Stepping into
yeah.
that role and how hard it is. So where do we want to start? Do we want to start with some of our own experiences? Do we want to start with what do you think?
Well, geez, there's so many ways that we
I
could
know.
start this.
Well, why don't we start with our own childhoods? Let's do a timeline thing, right? Like, so
Okay.
we both had
Okay.
step parents, right? Growing up. Everybody already knows my short story is short and sweet. My
Yes.
stepfather was a monster, right? Go back and listen to one of my first episodes to hear my story. And so I don't even know that I can like say a whole lot about being a step parent because it was so overshadowed, right, by the violence and all the things.
Right. Right.
So that was my experience having a step parent. It was great. It was great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, you had a double whammy. Not only did you have a step parent, but you also had a predator.
Exactly.
So there's that. Um, pedophile predator. Let's
Exactly.
triple threat.
Yay.
Um, my experience having a step parent was interesting
Yeah.
because, you know, this was the time in our childhood where my our father had kidnapped Devin.
Yeah, because that's what fathers do, by the
That's
way.
what papas do,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And so Devin was kidnapped. My mom went into a downward spiral. She
Yeah.
already has mental health issues, depression, all those things. And now her youngest child has been kidnapped by the person that she, like, that was like her. Kurt was, I think, my mom's like first, like, true love, you know, like
Uh,
she really loved him, you know, and, unfortunately, he was not emotionally available, you
right.
know, for anyone, not even his
Yeah.
kid, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, for anyone, even himself, you know. And so, and that's, gosh, that's one of the hardest things with relationships is one party is not emotionally available and the
Yeah.
other one just needs that.
Yep.
It's so heartbreaking. But anyways, so she goes into this downward spiral and she's dating every guy in town. Like, I mean, she was on a date every night. Devin or Jason and I were alone every single night
That's
for I don't
crazy.
even know how long. I remember
And
laying
remind us how old you were. You were little.
I was
Yeah.
6.
Yeah.
So I remember one night laying in my mom's bed, just screaming at the top of my lungs, "I just want my mom." You know, like I that's all I wanted. And that Jason didn't know what the hell to do. You know, he was like,
I'm
just stop
sure.
crying. And I'm like, you know, like
Right.
all I wanted. I just wanted to hang out with her, but she was always gone. So, um, she meets our stepdad, Michael. And
Hmm.
so what made this weird is that my mom at the time was 37. Michael is 22. So she's 15 years older.
Wow.
Michael is 10 years older than Jason.
Wow.
10. He's 12. Michael's 22.
That's insane.
All of a sudden, he's our new stepdad. Like it was like I don't, you know, when we're kids, we don't have a really good concept of time.
Yeah, of course.
It just seemed like and when we're little, if you remember back when you were little, 5 minutes seemed like 5 years,
Of
right?
course.
So for me and my brain to go, it was like they met and then they were married was is like for a little kid
Yeah.
to be that quick, it
Yep.
was fucking quick. You
Exactly.
know, I don't know the time frame, but it was fucking quick. Like all of a sudden we were in a courthouse. Devin had come back. So I would say maybe 6 months or so. Like my
Yeah.
mom was dating and stuff, and Devin was gone for 6 months. And then he comes back, and then it was like she meets him like right around the same time, and then boom, they were like married. So it was crazy. And then my mom's pregnant, you know, and then, you know, but we on the step parent side, he was in the Navy. He's 22 years old. He's partying. He's an alcoholic. He's a
Yeah.
functioning alcoholic. And she invites this chaos into the circus, you know? And so it's like we had a 22-year-old bachelor living in our house. Like literally like somebody was talking about their music influence. And so this is one thing that I kind of like chuckled and I was like, this is kind of cool, was he came with boxes and boxes of albums and CDs and
Huh.
VHS videos because he would record HBO while he was at work. You know, he had like
Gotcha.
all that stuff, you know, and that was back in the day when we had VHSs, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
You had a time your recorder and he would
Yep.
record movies. So it was kind of cool because he came with all this entertainment and we
Oh.
didn't have any of that shit. We didn't have it. Like I think we had a little tiny TV, but he had a bigger TV, he had a stereo system, he had all this stuff. So in the we were like, this is like fucking Disneyland.
Oh my
This is the
God.
coolest shit ever because
Right.
we had all this cool music that we never heard before because my mom only listened to like the Beatles and shit.
Right.
And now we
Right.
have
Right. Right.
Michael Jackson and the Beastie Boys and like all the cool stuff. And we're like,
Oh my
okay, like here
gosh.
we go, you know? So that part was cool. But in his defense, I mean, he was really thrown into some bullshit, you know, a mentally unstable woman with 3 kids. The last one is like super fucked up because he just came back from being kidnapped for 6 months, so he's
Right.
everywhere. You know, and then you're moving in a 22-year-old an instant father to 3 children, and then
I
now
can only imagine. Like, and I know we'll never hear that story, right? But
ever,
what an
yeah,
interesting story would be to hear, like, how he
dealt
decided to
with
marry
shit,
her, right?
right?
Like, and his family, like, what his family must have thought. Like, his family must have been just like, what the fuck, you
All I
know?
have to say, this is going to be totally terrible, but it was probably WAP. It was that WAP. I don't know because
Interesting.
you
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know who in their right mind would step into that and go, "Oh, please sign me
Let
up."
me.
What? Are you high?
Your mom had a
My
hold
mom
on
laid
you.
it down, man. Like, that's all I can
Evidently.
think of.
Evidently.
And she is just like, woo,
Wow.
life changing
Wow.
because you you know,
So
not
then
what I know now.
once
Uh,
he settles in, and I know, like you said, in the beginning it was like living with a bachelor and all the things, but at what point do you feel like he started to take on that role of stepdad? Like you started to see him in that role beyond being told he's your father now. Now call him that. Which, by the way, everybody
by the way,
is
did
on
happen.
our it's on our pitfalls list. That's a
Yeah,
no do. Let's not automatically tell your children now they will call this other person something,
right. And
whatever it is. Yeah.
even Zoom says that's a big thumbs up.
Even Zoom was like, let me get in on this.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal, and we'll revisit this, and it was an episode I don't even know right now, but we talked about that how once they got married, my mother had sat us all down and said, "You need to call Michael dad. And if you don't call him dad, you're going to be in trouble." And what we knew of that was we're going to get the shit beat out of us. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
we'll deprive something, whatever. Like, it's not going to be fucking fun. And so we were like, okay, hi, dad. Like, and we were also told that
Oh,
our dad was no longer our dad anymore.
oh. Which, by the
Like,
way,
what the
he
fuck?
kind of opted out of. Like that
Well,
actually,
I mean, come on, he didn't really opt into to being a
true.
father of his 12 children.
But to your point, like the idea, right, that that's the language we would use with our children, right? And we won't hash it again because we've talked about like
Yeah.
the roles of our moms, but in that case, right, like that's so like not putting the child first, right? At
Oh,
all.
well, I mean, let's
You
face it,
know?
when our current world is so different than when we
Yeah,
were
very true.
young.
Right.
When our parents were our age, a totally different world. It was all about control and all of
Yeah.
those things and just keep moving forward because that's what we all do and we're
Yep.
all lemmings. And now I love the emotional intelligence awareness,
Yeah.
that's going on now and so many people are so more aware of how they show up and everything else. So
So true.
it's an
Yeah.
awakening and I love it. So,
Yeah.
but I digress on that. It's, if you want to hear that whole freaking story, we'll have to put the notes and put in
Yeah,
the
we'll put the note. I can't remember what episode it is off
I
the top.
don't even know. Like it's just
But
whatever.
at
Just
some
know that
point,
that happened.
right, yeah, exactly. At some point we got through all of that, and I do know that now, right, looking back now as an adult,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
look back
So
fondly in terms of like what he tried to do for you guys and what his family did for you guys,
yeah,
etc.
and they were great,
Yeah,
and he really did try, but I mean, I really think that over the years, he's definitely turned into my mom's minion, and
yeah,
and that's just how they are now. But he would try,
yeah,
he would try. I think that a lot of his stuff was ruled by my mom, so
yeah,
he didn't really have a voice. It was just more so
yep,
him being my mom's,
yeah, yeah,
muscle, you know. Um, but there was things that he would do that was just like weird, and we were just like, why does he? And it's just his personality.
yeah,
As a stepdad, I will say that, he really does care about us and love
yeah,
us,
yeah,
and he tried really, really hard with what he was given,
yeah,
and the stage in life that he was in. He was 22 years old and took on a full fucking family.
yeah,
So being a 22-year-old man that I believe may be on, the spectrum a little bit,
yeah,
he has some things and stuff like that. To take on all of that, he did a stellar job.
yeah,
Where they're at now is in their own like weird codependent
yeah,
weirdo stuff, so it is what it is. But he tried, he really
yeah,
tried, and he tried the hardest to be a provider, but that's
yeah.
not enough.
No,
um, I wish that he would have done a little bit more when it came to protecting us from our mom,
yeah,
and stuff like that, because he saw the stuff, he saw it,
yeah,
and I mean, he was being abused too, I
yeah,
mean, let's be honest. So I'm sure that he in his own right didn't know what to do, but it was crazy. But
yeah,
I think he did his best,
yeah.
that's really
Well,
what it comes down
and I
to.
think that's a nice segue then to us talking about kind of our experience and, what some of the things that we can put forward to our audience in terms of how to think about being in this role. And again, whether you're on the cusp of going into this role, whether you've been in it for a while and you know, excuse me, that you're struggling, that your children are struggling, whatever the circumstances. In one of our more recent episodes, we talked about this idea of like, it's never too late to make amends with your children. It's never too late to be a different parent, even if they're adults, right? If you,
Right.
because in that episode, I know we talked about like, you got to be the parent that they're going to want to choose eventually,
Right.
because once they turn
Right.
18. So, when Joe and I, for us, right, this idea of like being a step parent, honestly, it started that we started talking about that almost as soon as we started dating, because from very early on when we started dating, we knew we were going to be together.
Yep.
And for those who haven't caught up, Joe and I went to high school together. We dated briefly our senior year. I broke his heart. And he then spent 20 years, wandering the earth and waiting for me to come back. And so that's basically what
Totally.
happened.
That's exactly what
And
happened.
so when we reconnected, we knew almost immediately. And he has 4 biological children. I have 2 biological children. That's the only time you'll hear me talk of them in that way, because from the get go, we have both said, this doesn't work if they're not ours, right? It does not work if we move forward with your kids and my kids. From the get go, it has to be ours. Now, we can say that behind the scenes, but with the children themselves, right? They have to catch up, right? To your point
Right.
about being told, here's your new daddy, right? But you got to let the kids catch up. The kids have to come to that on their own, right? And so we never ever got caught up in like, you'll refer to me as even your step parent, let alone your mother. God only knows. Or that's your stepsister, or that's your right. Like for us, it was about they will use the language when they're ready to use the language. And the cool thing is now that, 10 years later, they don't even usually refer to each other as step siblings. They say,
Yeah.
that's my brother, that's my sister, right? And we never asked them to do that. That was letting them and letting their relationships evolve, right?
Right.
Um, so for us out of the gate, that was one of the big rules. The second big rule was to never ever speak ill of their other parent in their presence. And we've actually, I feel like, done a good job of like, we haven't spent a lot of time in 10 years talking negatively about their other parents anyway,
Okay.
right? Like those relationships are separate from our marriage, right? But certainly making sure that we that there's never anything negative, right, said about the other parent. And in fact, quite the opposite, an intention to look for the positives to say out loud, right, about the other parent with our children, so that they see that, and in the end, we're all a team, right? Like, and that's how it had to be from the beginning. Remembering that when we got married, our kids were the 2 oldest. Lainey had just graduated high school. Brandon was a year or 2 out of high school. And then Jonah and Montana were in high school. Sid was in middle school. Cammie was little. She was in early elementary school. So that was the range of ages that we had when we got married. And that was helpful on some level, I think, just because since some were already young adults and then we had Cammie who was really little, right? There was a different relationship you developed with each of them,
Yes.
right? Out of the gate. So that's kind of the way we started, right? And I can talk more about some of the things that we've done along the way. But how about you? Because you've had that experience as well.
Yeah, I've had that experience twice. And I wish that obviously they weren't successful and amongst other reasons, but you know, that was a huge part that me as the parent that I am kind of took for granted, thinking that the other person was going to be the same way and not having the
Mm,
conversation like you and Joe did.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, and just like basing it off of this is what we do on a regular basis, but
yeah,
when you're in the home and everything's combined and everything's happening, you start to see, oh, okay, we need to have conversations and we need to talk about this. But now, it gets to the point where if you don't talk about it beforehand or get ahead of it or
yeah,
handle it right when the first time it happens and talk about it and come up with the answer to how you're going to handle it moving forward, you won't be successful because every
exactly.
single time is going to be, oh well, this was the case this time, and whether whoever's getting defensive,
Yep,
because usually it's the person of the child that did something wrong or
yep,
whatever, you're just picking on my child. I mean, I've been through all of that,
yeah,
back and forth both ways. And so, that's what I would say is, you're giving really great advice, is like really having that conversation and talking about how you are going to handle things, how you are going to speak about the other parents and
Yep.
not speak about them. Those are so important because, I remember I've always been a big believer in, you don't even speak to your children, especially
Yeah,
about your dislikes or
exactly.
contentions points with the other person. You don't talk
Yep.
to your children about that.
No,
You don't,
exactly.
because it's none of their business and has nothing to do with them. And as soon as
Right.
you start telling them these things, then it does become their problem.
Yeah, their relationship with their other parent is their relationship with their other parent. And what I always say is like, kids need a healthy relationship with both parents, no matter
Absolutely.
what the adults have done to each other. Frankly, it's completely irrelevant, right? Short of putting people in danger, right? Like obviously there's always a line, right? If somebody's beating the shit out of you, you're going to be worried about them being with your children. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about typical, right? Kind of more typical situations, but at the end of the day, they need that healthy relationship, and you can despise that other parent, right? And that it
Right.
can't be relevant. It just literally can't be relevant in the kid's relationship.
Right. Exactly. And so and I always made myself a promise because, again, back to our childhood,
Yeah.
and everything that I do is based off of my childhood. I have tracked
Welcome to the
my
crowd.
yeah, I've tracked my personal lineage and my time frame of life. So, but just being able to give them a voice, the kids a voice too, and I'm not one of those people that's like, it's not fair, but you got to have some type of equal rights in your own home when it
That's
comes
right.
to being able to talk to somebody and bring something up, and oh, don't do that, I'll do this part and you only do that part, and it's just silliness. So just being able to not have those gosh, what am I'm double standards, that's the word I'm looking for.
That's
Not
exactly right.
standards with the kids,
Yeah.
making sure that
Yeah.
everybody has the same rules, because
Yep.
it was like, for me and my experience, the way that I parent and everything else is great, but
Yeah.
not when it comes to my kids. I want to do my own thing over here. So it was like
Yeah.
wild banshees, and then I have these kids that are obedient, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, so you don't want to parent. That's what you're saying. I
Right.
got it. I got it. So it's like we just had to deal with the chaos when it was there, and then everything would the dust would settle, and then it was
Yeah.
chaos, and then the dust would settle. So it was never like routine.
Yeah.
It was just whatever emotional decision that they wanted to make, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay,"
Well,
so
that's the big challenge, right? Because it's, this is as much about how you blend a family as it is about we're really
right,
focusing on being in that role of stepmom, but and I can speak for myself, stepmom, because I've never been a stepfather, right? You can have the so
right,
there's similarities, um but I think to what you're saying, right? So it's like, we talked before, right? How, like I said, how we would talk about the other parent, etc. But we also talked about parenting in general, right? We dated for a few years ahead of time, and in that time had opportunities to kind of practice how we would co-parent, right? Which is why when people do things so fast and move so quickly, I'm always like, it gives me a little bit of just anxiety because I'm like, okay, you got to give yourself time to practice before it's full time in the lives of these kids, right?
right.
And we were so careful when we started dating, Jane, that we made intentional decisions about when we would start holding hands in front of our children, when
Mhm.
we would kiss each other in front of our children, all the things because we knew they were still coming off of, especially the four youngest ones, were coming off of
Other
their
parents
parents being
being together.
divorced,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
so we were really intentional about all of those things. And to your point, a big part of those conversations in advance were how we were going to co-parent because we parented very differently. There were some similarities, don't get me wrong, but we definitely had different parenting styles, and we kind of had to have conversations early on about what would and wouldn't work, right? Like what I like would be a deal breaker for me or what would be a deal breaker for him. And be honest with ourselves in terms of like we can't get married if we can't figure this out because we're not going to do that to our children, right? This isn't going to be a like come along for the ride of our marriage, right? This is we're trying to build a new family, and so we have to factor all of that in. And so so some of the like kind of to-dos, right? Which none of this is going to shock anybody, right? But it's things like give yourself time. And in that time, allow your give your kids, your both your biological kids and your new children the opportunity to start building trust with you, develop a rapport with you. What's their relationship going to look like with you, right? And then, kind of how you're going to communicate with each other, what they can expect, and having conversations about that, right? And even like this idea of us kind of figuring out how we were going to co-parent together and then saying it out loud to them, right? And one of the things they knew is that this is never going to be his children and my children, and so it's never going to be, well, if they did something wrong, you deal with that, that's your kid, right? It
Right.
was always doing things together, because for both of us, we understood, like, if the kids saw each other being getting
It's
different
different.
consequences or getting different even gifts or getting even different positives, right? Then it was that whole, like, okay, who's got the power here? Because if one parent gives more to their kid or the other like, which is why from the get-go it had to be our, right? So those are some of the kind of to-dos, right? Things that we did out of the gate that have allowed us 10 years later to have but what I would call a highly effective blended family, right?
Oh
Which
yeah.
doesn't wasn't messy at times. Of course it was messy and it was hard. And again, especially as our children dealt with like the reality of our parents are never going to get back together again, all of that, like all of that stuff was there and hurtful and hard. But we were able to navigate it because of some of the things we agreed on up front.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly how you should set it up is, that communication is so important at the beginning. So then that way you can carry that through and remind each other of the promises that you made each other and everything
That's
else
right.
and hold each other accountable to that. And
Yep.
that's the biggest thing is the accountability for being a parent.
Yep.
But if you haven't made that decision on how you're going to parent, you can't hold each other accountable to that
That's
because
exactly right.
you never agreed to it. And that's the biggest, choice that I made, that I would have changed in those moments. And, we're doing it out of not only is it convenience,
Yeah.
because we're both parents and blah blah blah, but it's being scared adults trying to
Yes.
do this on our own and
Yep.
trying to figure it out and going, yeah, we love each other and we want to try to make this work. But, one of the other big things that really you should look out for and just pay attention to really is how do the kids interact with each other, what are
Yes.
those relationships like and stuff like that. Give them the opportunity to get to know the other kids before to where you can figure out the little like who likes who,
That's
and
right.
who's gonna get along and stuff like that, because if there's
Yep.
turmoil between the kids the whole time, there's never going to be a good adult relationship coming out of that.
Exactly.
And then it just fails because now you guys are fighting about the kids because the kids are fighting about them and
Yep.
they're taking my space and blah blah blah. Like it sucks,
Yeah.
and it never goes away because it's always there. And then, whoever's kids are rotating from one parent to the other,
Yep.
timing, it's always something. And it's like, you know, if none of the kids get along, it's just going to be a lot. It's going to be
That's
a
it.
lot. So just keep that in mind.
That's such a good point. Those relationships with each other. And we were fortunate, we've been called the Brady Bunch more than one time because we have 6 kids. But when we first got married, our we their very first year out of the gate, Joe was here in San Diego. So we lived here full time with the two children who were here with their mom, because his two youngest, and again I'm saying it that way for people to understand, not because I see them as his, but lived here in San Diego with their mom.
Mhm.
And so that year I spent 2 weeks a month in San Diego and 2 weeks a month in Virginia, because my tenants had stayed with their dad because we knew it was a transition year.
Yeah.
um Jonah and Cammy got kind of full-time dad, if you will. I mean, they went back and forth. And they got me sometimes, but sometimes not me. And that actually worked out really well, because then they were actually getting to know Joe again, because Joe had been in the Navy for Cammy's whole life by that point. And,
Yeah.
we saw him on holidays and summers, right? Like it wasn't a regular, a regular parent, if you will, and a full-time parent, right? Everyday parent. And so there were times where I wasn't there, which also was good because they needed that, right? They needed their time. And that's another kind of thing to do, right? Remember that even though we're going into it as they're our kids, we know that they need time with that parent,
That
right, in
individual
that
time
way.
is so important.
Exactly. But because of that, so Montana and Sid would come for holidays and they would spend time together, but they didn't have to live together. Like that's what I'm getting at. We didn't have all 6 kids under our roof at one time living together full time ever, right? That never happened.
Right.
Over the 10 years, it was like we had that for a year, and then Montana and Sid were with us full time, and Jonah
Right.
came for the breaks. And then interspersed were Brandon and Lainey, because again, young adults at that point. So they kind of came in and out. Lainey was in college, she came during breaks, the whole thing. Um, so that kind of helped, but to your point, I think it helped on some level just because they didn't all of a sudden get stuck in a house together and have to figure it out, right?
Right.
Like
And
they
that's
had
crazy.
time to figure
Yeah,
it out.
like it's you think about the what was it, The Parent Trap?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
God, like all of a sudden we're all just moving in together and it's like, oh wow. You're not
Yeah.
no, that wasn't The Parent Trap. It was oh, what's the other one?
It
With
was
the
like the one with like 8
5
and
million
B,
kids.
or like they had the gazillion kids. I know which one you're talking about, but I can't
Yeah,
remember
you
the
know what
name.
I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
like, they all just move in together and it's like, oh my gosh, the turmoil between all the
Yeah.
kids. That's real shit. That's
Yeah.
real shit because we act different when the new spouse is around and
Yeah.
we want to keep, we want to keep the balance and oh,
Yep.
everybody's happy and blah blah blah. But we're not if we're not sitting down talking to the kids about how they feel about what's going on. Oh, so and so left the towel on the bathroom
Yep.
floor like for the 15th time and mom, you don't like that. Okay, but there's new kids in the house and we
Yeah.
gotta, and so it's like old rules mixed with new rules
Yep.
and
We gotta flex. We
but
gotta
if
figure it
I would have
out.
left the towel on the floor, you would have killed me. But
Yep.
Tommy over there, you're okay with it. And so they start getting this
So
resentment because
true.
now you're parenting different and treating people.
Yep.
You love them more than me because they're so and so's kids. Oh
Yep.
my God. Ah.
Yeah. There's
You
so
know?
many. No, I love what you're doing because you're bringing up all the different angles, right? Again, we said in the beginning, it's not simple. It's messy and complex and hurtful and all the things. So it's like figuring out the mainstays, right? That even in the moments where it's hard, that you keep coming back to, right? Some of the things that we said already, other kinds of things that become mainstays, right? In terms of how you handle all of that while they're trying to figure out how to blend together, right? Avoiding negative comparisons, right? Between them, between the parents, all the things, right? Like not not comparing them to each other, which by the way is not easy to do, right? At that point, I had
Right.
been raising girls. So it was my first time with boys, and boys are smelly and but messy and all the things, and they know this. We talk out loud about this. And so I had to adjust to that because I was like,
Yes.
what the? Because I think it's different when you like raise a boy from birth, right?
Right.
But when you don't, and all of a sudden you've got like this, smelly teenager, and you're like, what? And I remember Montana and Sid struggling with that. Like,
Yeah,
why is
they're
it
like, he's so
breathe?
gross.
Right?
Yeah. Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
So,
You gotta think
and
about
then,
it this
they
way.
figure it out.
Yeah, but you got to think about it this way too. He's probably like, "Oh, I have a sister right now," or
Yeah,
they're little or whatever, and then all of a sudden, he has,
exactly.
two more sisters.
Yep,
Oh, Jesus,
exactly,
and here we go,
exactly.
and they're different, and they
Yep,
think different, and they say different things, and this is, it's just so much all at once. It's an
yeah,
overload of stimuli, and it's them navigating through all of that stuff too. So
exactly,
as much as we would all like it to be, the Brady Bunch and happy go lucky and all those things, we really have to take in consideration the kids,
exactly.
the effect on the kids and how we can best support them in it. Because this is a decision that we're making as adults that
We're doing it to them.
you're gonna be great.
Yeah,
This is gonna be fun,
exactly right.
guys. Watch. And they're like,
No, yeah.
you
You watch, right? Like, but like you
watch.
said, you have to create that space. And you brought up in what your comments just now, a couple of the other like pitfalls to avoid, right? And one of them is like you can't ignore, like in your effort to make the stepchildren build the rapport and build the trust with them, you can't ignore the biological children, right? Like
Right.
and so one of I've said this example many times to people that we were so intentional from day one, right? And so recognized that we were doing this to them, right? And so we had to allow for that. We had to allow some space for that, right? We had to not be as I don't know, set in our own way, set on our own rules and stuff, right? Like we had to give them a chance to melt down and give them the space to have their emotions and all the things. But that also included, like, I remember vividly, like, we've lived in one, two, three, 4 houses, 4 or 5 houses since we were married.
Okay.
Um, and in each one, I have like down to the number ensured that there were an equal number of pictures of every child,
Oh my
right?
God.
I like when we lived in Washington and Jonah and Cammy were coming up to visit and breaks and stuff, I would make sure that in the room that Jonah was sleeping in, there were pictures of him and his mom,
Yeah.
right? Like this idea that we don't want you to feel like that when you come to the family that you have to turn your back on the other part of the family, right? Like we're
Right.
all family, and that doesn't mean that we're besties because we're not, but it does mean that we're all, when we say family, we mean everybody, right? Not just, oh no, just our family. And I actually remember that reminds me, oh my gosh, like it takes time. And here's the indicator that just popped into my head. So we had been married maybe 3 years, I guess, when Montana and Jonah were graduating because they both no 3 years when they and then five, so it was almost the 5 year mark actually now that I think about it. And then so at the 5 year-ish mark, Sid was graduating. And the reason I remember this moment is that we were on, graduation at her school, high school, on the football field, everything was over. We're all down on the field taking pictures, right?
Right.
And Montana's grandma's there, and my sister Ann is there, we're all there, we're taking pictures. And at one point, we're like taking family pictures, and Cammy kind of steps aside, and we were like, "What are you doing?" And she was like, "Oh no, that's your family." And I was like, "Babe, your family. We're all family,
Yeah.
right?"
Like, what are you talking about?
And so she came right back into it. But my point in that is that even with as careful as we had been, as intentional as we had been, and her little brain at the time, I shouldn't say little anymore, but I guess she was 11, 12, right at the time, she still had that like thought or that understanding that, oh, that's her grandma, that's their family, that's um and now she refers to it as Nana just like they do, right? Because Nana comes and spends time with us and all that kind of stuff. So you just have to be so intentional
Mhm.
about calling that stuff out, right? And being really careful about it. And the other thing I want to say is like in terms of like pitfalls to avoid is you in all of that, you still have to take care of the two of you, right? As a couple, right? Like you still have to like make sure that you're taking care of the two of you, which is really hard to do in the midst of all that.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, and that's and you got to remember that you're in a new relationship, a new marriage,
exactly.
and you know, typically when people get married, they're or the stereotypical marriage is
Yeah,
young, zero children,
right.
haven't really lived life together yet. Now you're going to go live life, and then in a couple of years start adding kids. Not,
Yeah,
I'm jumping into a full-fledged, dysfunctional family right off the
right.
bat, and here we go. Let's start the party.
Yeah,
That's not your stereotypical American dream wedding.
yeah,
So, knowing that and going into that, be prepared, people.
yeah.
Be prepared because there's
Yep,
so many different levels. It's not just how you two are going to work together and parent together. It's how is everybody going to function as a family unit, because that's
exactly.
really what it is,
Yeah,
you know, and the outskirts. Because
yep,
not because you mentioned something earlier, and I wanted to bring this up. You said, I we knew that we weren't going to talk bad about the other parent and
yep,
they wouldn't about us and blah blah blah. I know what probably wasn't easy at the very beginning, but you work on that relationship too. You
yep,
have to bring in the other parents into that
exactly.
fold,
Yeah,
because if you don't have cooperation with them, the other stuff won't work
that's
because
right.
they will be, either intentionally driving a wedge or
Yep,
unintentionally driving a wedge. Unless if you're not communicating on how things are working within each other's home,
yeah,
and even trying to mirror that, so then that way
yep,
there's more consistency. That's the thing that the kids, thrive on, is consistency throughout.
exactly.
Just like you said, you had pictures of Jonah and his mom.
Yep,
Why wouldn't you?
yep,
Like that makes sense to me, but I know there's plenty of women and or men that don't
yeah,
want to see their spouse's ex
yeah,
in pictures,
yeah.
and they make a big stink about it. Who gives a shit? It's still
Well,
their.
for me, it's about like, why are you threatened? Like,
Yes, you're
why
not,
in the world would you be threatened,
whatever.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
And
it's
and
my
for us, it's
house or
like
blah blah blah, whatever. Who cares?
exactly, and we've said this many times across episodes, this idea that like we want our kids to know that no matter what happens to the romantic relationship, family doesn't have to be gone, right?
Right.
Like, because the adults decide to get divorced doesn't mean that family goes away.
No.
Family is what you make of it, right? And that's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a whole other episode I think out there for us to have a conversation about in terms of the co-parenting, right? The
Right.
co-parenting with the other parent. So we can put in that and come back because we can have a long conversation about that as well, right? But you're right. It's the two of you, it's the family unit, it's the people outside who influence it, right? And how you create consistency for your kiddos across all of that. Two other as I kind of look at the time here,
Yeah.
two other things that I want to put on the table too are like this idea of like show interest in who their other parent is, right? In terms of like family rituals and traditions and that kind of stuff. When Joe and I got married, he was like, we didn't really have a lot of traditions, right? Whereas I'm a very big, like, there are certain things I'm
You're
like, you can't fix
traditional.
this. I got my own traditions, right? So we had to kind of start to do those and then feel them out, right, with the kids. Because what I didn't, again, what you don't want to do is make the kids feel like you're replacing anything, right? But you also message very much so that it's okay for them to be different. It's okay
Right.
for Christmas to look one way when you're here and another way when you're at your other parent's house, right? Or when we go to have Christmas with a grandparent, that's going to look different from this too, right? Like it's okay for it to be different. And it's okay for us to celebrate on different days, which we had to do for years, right? Because,
Months. Yeah.
you did, and it's not that, oh, you went to, mom for Christmas and so we don't have Christmas. It's that now you get two Christmases, which by the way is at least one of the bonuses of, right?
It
Of
really
having divorced
is.
parents. Yeah.
It really is. It really is. Unless you have a parent that, you know, gets mad that you weren't there on that holiday, so you don't get anything.
I
So
feel like
for
there's a
my
whole other story
children,
there, but yes.
there's
Yes.
a major story behind that, but yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. See, that's the kind of
Anyways,
stuff. And I know you and I are so synergetic like that. We look at that, we're like, why? Why? Why would you do
and
that to a
that's
child?
but
Why
there's
would you
so
make
many
that so
people
hard?
out in the world that it totally makes sense for.
I know.
Like, well, yeah, I mean, come on. And so it's totally the perspective. And
Yeah.
hopefully we can help change perspectives into more positive thinking and all those things. But,
Well, and give
you know,
people different ways to think about it, right? Because at the end of the day, we're developing adults, right? That we want to be good people who give back to their world, and we don't do that, right? If we put them just through the worst of the worst. And that kind of brings me to probably what's my final like pitfall to avoid. And that is that out of the gate, you have to remember you are not there to, and you never will replace the other parent, right? Like you can't come into the role of stepmom thinking to yourself, I hope one day they'll call me mom because they have a mother,
right,
right?
right.
For better or for worse, they have a mother. And I know all contexts are different. And so for me, my mantra has always been, I am, even early on, especially with Cami, because she was a little on, what should I call you? Right? Like she would ask that question. And my answer would be, you should call me whatever you want to call me. And
Yeah,
know that I am another adult in your life who loves you and wants to be a resource for you. That's who I am in your world. So when people say, who is that? Right? You can refer to me as your stepmom. You can refer to me as Janice. You can refer, like, whatever you want to do, you do. But at the core, I am just another adult who loves you and wants to be a resource to you. And it happens that I'm also married to your father and we all are a family together.
right.
Right. And I think that's one of the mistakes people make is in their head feeling like it's not a win or a success unless they call me mom, unless they like me better than they like their mom, unless they like, and if that's what you're setting out to do, you are doing it wrong on the sake of that kid,
Right.
right? You're just doing it wrong. That's as clear as I can say
Well,
it.
and the reason for that is, and I know this is going to be hard to hear,
Yeah.
but it's not about us. It's about them
Yep. That's it.
and what they're comfortable with and when they're ready for things and everything else. And you can't force those things. And, going back to the, being forced to call somebody dad when you know they're
Yeah.
not your dad and being told your dad is gone, like that fucks you up.
Yep.
I will never forget that day.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever in my whole entire life will I ever forget being lined up, being told that. Ever.
And in the end, doesn't it really send the message that those titles don't mean shit?
Yeah.
If they
Well,
can just be easily plucked away and moved around, right? Now
yeah.
this person is, now that person is.
Hmm.
Okay, so it doesn't really mean anything, is what you're saying to me.
Exactly.
And that's, of course, not the message we would want our children to have. I love that. I think you're exactly right, right? It's at the core about them. And if you're unsure, you can ask yourself, how do I feel like they'll feel, or what will they think? Or even better, you can ask them,
Yeah.
right? You can ask them, and it's hard to do, and it's uncomfortable, and you have a pit in your stomach, and they don't like it either because it's uncomfortable, and they probably won't feel like crying and all the things. But what they'll remember is that you asked them,
Yep.
right? And that's I think
That'll be a core memory forever. And
exactly
and I know that, when back in the fall with Thanksgiving, I know that that will forever be a core memory for Chase when I gave her the choice to have that guest
right.
come to Thanksgiving and not, and
Yep.
let her make the choice. And she'll never forget that,
That's exactly right.
ever, ever, ever.
Mhm.
So they remember good things and they remember the bad things too.
That's right.
So let's try to make those core memories good more than bad.
Well, and it goes back to, for me, final thought, that similar final thought to a few episodes, which is be the parent they will choose eventually. Because if you
Yep.
decide to make it all about you in those years, and you decide to do what makes you happy, and kind of like they'll figure it out, they'll get over it, they'll be fine, they won't choose you later,
Yeah.
right? They won't choose you later. And so be the parent you want them to choose, right? That's
Yeah.
at the core.
Now and later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, I love it. Look at
Yeah.
that. Now everybody knows. Go forth, be stepmothers. You're welcome.
Yes.
So
You
great.
can do it too.
You can
And
do it too.
yeah, if you're having trouble, just listen to our podcast. We'll give you
Yeah,
some tips.
exactly, exactly. But in with that in mind, last thought, of course, as always, like, share, and subscribe. We'd love to actually increase to like 20 viewers on a regular, or
Oh
listeners on
gosh,
a
yes.
basis. It'd be
Yeah.
cool, right? It'd be cool. And in the notes of the podcast is our email, because we'd love to hear your stories. If you have a step parent story that you think would be really important for people to hear, whether it's a don't do what I did story, or a this actually turned out really well for me story, we would love to be able to share those as well. Our experiences obviously are incredible, but we also know there's a lot of people in the world, and there's probably a few other incredible experiences. So we would love to have all of the things. So like, share, subscribe, do all the things.
Yes.
Peace out.
Yeah. See you guys later. Bye.